Hi, I'm Will Bruscher. I'm a labor historian with the Rutgers Labor Education Action Research Network. Here I am at the Paul Robeson Plaza on the College Avenue campus of Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I'm here to present my video, A Democracy Cannot Exist Without Labor Unions, Paul Robeson and the Labor Movement. Paul Robeson was a member of the class of 1919. He had a storied career as a singer and an actor, and he was also an activist, and one of his favorite causes was that of the labor unions in Great Britain and the Congress of Industrial Organizations here in the United States.
A democracy cannot exist without labor unions. Paul Robeson and the labor movement. Paul Robeson was born in Princeton in 1898. After losing their mother Maria at a young age, Robeson and his siblings were raised by their father, William Drew Robeson. The elder Robeson had escaped slavery in North Carolina as a teenager in 1860 and later became a Presbyterian minister in Princeton and an AME Zion Church minister in Somerville. Upon graduating Somerville High School, Paul Robeson won a scholarship to Rutgers College in 1915, the only black student on campus at that time and among the first to attend the college at all. By his graduation in 1919, he had become a top student, a talented musical and theatrical performer, and a varsity athlete in several sports, including as an All-American on the football team. Since the late 1960s and early 1970s, Rutgers University has honored Robeson in several ways, including the library in Camden, the campus center in Newark, the Cultural Center in New Brunswick, and a new memorial on Voorhees Mall. The city of New Brunswick has also honored Robeson by naming a boulevard after him. After short stints as an NFL player and a Columbia University-trained lawyer, Robeson gained fame in the 1920s and 1930s as one of the most famous black actors and singers in the world. He starred in productions like The Emperor Jones, Othello, and the musical Showboat on stage and screen. In the 1930s, Robeson established himself as a left-wing political activist and leader. He was dedicated to smashing Jim Crow laws and practices in the United States and supported the decolonization of peoples throughout Asia, Africa, and the Americas. For much of the decade, Robeson, his wife Islanda, and son Paul Jr. lived abroad, including in Great Britain and the Soviet Union. Robeson was a supporter of the Soviet Union and the Soviet people, seeing that nation as a bulwark against fascism and race prejudice. However, Robeson's ties to the labor movement began in Great Britain in 1929. As he exited the London theater where he was performing Showboat, Robeson witnessed a procession of singing Welsh miners who were marching from Wales to London to protest their blacklisting from the mines due to their labor activism. Impressed by their singing and camaraderie, Robeson joined their march and sang along, despite him being dressed in his theater attire. Robeson's friendships with coal miners and other British trade unionists deepened in the ensuing years. He performed concert benefits and fundraisers for them and traveled extensively in their communities. In 1940, he starred in The Proud Valley, a film about an African-American merchant seaman who disembarks his ship and wanders into the Welsh countryside. There he joins a Welsh miners' choir, works with them underground, and joins them in their labor struggles. Robeson's experiences with British workers and their unions convinced him that a multiracial and multicultural labor movement was possible, melding the struggle for better jobs with the causes of racial equality, peace, and socialism. Upon returning to live and work predominantly in the United States in the early 1940s, Robeson found a home in the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. Founded in 1935 and led by John L. Lewis of the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, the CIO unions had split from the more conservative craft unions of the American Federation of Labor. Most AFL unions had few, if any, black members. In addition to the UMWA, some other industrial unions that had been part of the AFL joined the CIO, while other affiliates were fledgling but militant organizations trying to organize basic industries like auto, steel, and electrical manufacturing. CIO unions mounted audacious campaigns and major strikes to organize millions of workers, including the United Auto Workers' Flint sit-down strike at General Motors. CIO unions were generally much more inclusive than AFL unions because they sought to organize workers across skill categories at common industrial employers. CIO unions organized not only white men, but women and people of color. Robeson got to work convincing black workers to join the CIO, including at Ford Motor Company, which was still unorganized in 1940 because of Henry Ford's strident opposition to unions. In a piece he wrote for the CIO News, Robeson remarked that though most black workers knew him as a football player and as a famous singer, he had worked on an ice wagon, worked as a bricklayer, and worked as a restaurant waiter while putting himself through college. He went on to state how he had gotten involved with the British labor movement and became convinced that he must do something about the specific problems facing black workers, as well as the problems of all workers, whether they were white or people of color. He believed all workers should belong to the same unions rather than join separate organizations by race. He was glad that this was the policy of the CIO. In the same piece, he brought up issues of labor and democracy. He stated that, quote, "It was astonishing that a man like Ford and a large industry like Ford Motor Company have been able to operate in a democracy and not have to deal with the labor movement." He argued that the problems facing black people, quote, "cannot be solved by a few of us getting to be doctors and lawyers," and continued by writing, quote, "The best way my race can win justice is by sticking together in progressive labor unions, and that it would be unpardonable for black workers to, quote, fail to join CIO. By contrast, Robeson noted that A. Philip Randolph, the black president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, had difficulty getting on the floor of the AFL convention to present the demands of black workers. If black workers did not join the CIO, Robeson warned, they would be regarded as scabs. They could only be a part of American democracy if they organized. Robeson concluded a democracy cannot exist without labor unions. Robeson especially found a warm welcome within the most left wing of CIO unions, many of which had Communist Party members or sympathizers in leadership positions. These included the mine, mill, and smelter workers, the food, tobacco, and agricultural workers, the United Electrical Workers, maritime unions, including the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union, the National Maritime Union, and the Marine Cooks and Stewards Union. He held performances for the members of these unions and delivered speeches at their conventions, remarking on their achievements in uniting workers of all races, their commitments to both winning shop floor demands and engaging in progressive politics. And in the case of the Longshoremen's Union, showing his pride in his status as an honorary member. Robeson's speeches fused the causes of labor rights and civil rights. Here is an audio clip from a speech he gave to the Marine Cooks and Stewards Union Convention. Like the National Maritime Union, NMU, and the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union, ILWU, the MCS had a multiracial membership, while the maritime craft unions that were in the AFL remained segregated.
I come from a slave father, not grandfather, a slave father, born in eastern North Carolina in 1843, escaped from slavery in 1858, a contemporary co-fighter with Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, John Brown, Sojourner Truth, and William Lloyd Garrison for the freedom not only of the Negro people, but of millions of white workers caught in the same serfdom as their black brothers and sisters. So our brothers and sisters from Mexico, the Philippines, from the lands of Asia, from the West Indies, from Latin America, have come to these shores to share the same fate. And all through our history, the working masses, colored and white, speaking many languages, representatives of the finest of the old and new world cultures, have had to fight every step of the way for a decent wage, for decent homes, for decent education for their children, for human dignity itself.
Robeson's political aspirations seemed within grasp through World War II. The US, Britain, and the Soviet Union were in a united front against Hitler's Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy, and Imperial Japan. He spoke and performed for large audiences, calling for the double V, victory against fascism abroad and against Jim Crow at home. However, the onset of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union after World War II severely affected Robeson in his career. Robeson remained a stalwart supporter of the Soviet Union. Left-wing labor unions, including several in the CIO, came under government scrutiny for ties with the Communist Party. By 1950, the CIO expelled these unions, including the ILWU, the MCS, the Mine Mill and Smelters Workers, and the United Electrical Workers. Other unions, including the UAW and NMU, followed the CIO leadership and became staunchly anti-communist. Singers and actors like Robeson, who had ties to the Communist Party, were blacklisted from performing on the radio, on TV, and in motion pictures. Nevertheless, Robeson remained true to his convictions and continued to support left-wing causes and organizations. In turn, the unions that were ultimately expelled from the CIO and their rank-and-file members continued to support Robeson. In August 1947, anti-communist rioters prevented Robeson from performing at an outdoor concert near Peekskill, New York. When a rescheduled concert was held a month later, left-wing union members from the New York City area provided security. In 1950, the federal government refused to renew Robeson's passport. Even though travel to Canada was permitted without a passport at that time, the government also refused to allow him to go to British Columbia to perform for members of the Mine Mill and Smelters Union. In response, the Mine Mill Union held the concert at the Blaine, Washington Peace Arch Park on the British Columbia border in 1952. While Robeson sang from a stage on the U.S. side of the border, tens of thousands of concertgoers watched from the Canadian side. British trade unionists and other supporters of Robeson initiated the Let Robeson Sing campaign, demanding the restoration of his passport. This resulted in a 1957 concert where Robeson sang for a London audience over a transatlantic telephone connection. Robeson's passport was restored by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1958, and he immediately embarked on visits to Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and other countries, and restarted his singing and acting career. However, his physical and mental health began to deteriorate, and he could not be very active from the 1960s through his death in 1976. But Robeson left a powerful legacy. He was a direct inspiration to generations of actors, singers, and activists. 5,000 people attended his funeral in Harlem. Reflecting on his retirement, Robeson stated, quote, "People should understand that when I could be active, I went here, there, and everywhere. What I wanted to say, I said. And now that ill health has compelled my retirement, I have decided to let my record speak for itself." To conclude this video presentation, here's Paul Robeson singing Joe Hill to an audience of coal miners in Scotland in 1949. Though Robeson was performing an American song about the martyred industrial workers of the world troubadour, it resonated with labor activists everywhere.
Dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joel, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe says, I am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill went on to organize, went on to organize. I dreamed I saw Joe here last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. I never died, says